to try.
May have to. It's said that it's no, actually.
I think we are live.
Up and running. So fantastic.
Yeah.
We made it with a little bit of technical difficulty in the background there. So apologies for maybe being 1 or 2 seconds late. And thank you everybody for joining us here today at the Microsoft Fabric UK User Group. As always, I'm your host Leon Gordon, and I'm here with my co-host Pragati Jain.
Hey everyone. Hope everyone is doing great this evening.
Excellent. How are you doing this evening, Pragati?
I'm good. I'm happy to log off now and then crack on and learn some Python in Fabric.
Exactly.
So excited for this session, yeah.
Very, very exciting times. And our speaker today is an absolute expert on the subject, Microsoft MVP, Mark Wilcock. And like I mentioned, today we're going to be going through using Python in Microsoft Fabric. As always, let's start with the niceties. Please do let us know where in the world you're joining us from, whether it's hot, whether it's cold, whether it's raining. We want to know this evening, please. Okay. Now, with that being said, I'm just going to bring Mark on screen. We do want this to be an interactive session, so please do put your questions into the chat, into the comments. If you can prefix them with a Q, that would be even better. But thank you very much. So, Mark, welcome.
Thank you very much. Hi, Leon. Hi, Pragati. Hi, everybody.
How are you doing this evening?
Not bad. Not bad at all. Looking forward to this.
Oh, definitely. Like we say, Fabric, Microsoft Fabric has been a massively hot topic, as is Python as well. So I, for one, am looking forward to this session.
Good.
Perfect. Okay. With that being said, we'll hand over to you, Mark. Thank you very much.
Great. Can I check that you can see my screen with the wonderful Power BI chart?
Absolutely. Let's just bring this in.
Perfect.
Yeah, we can see our screen.
Excellent.
That's looking great. Fantastic.
Perfect. And if we can just ask the audience as we go throughout, if you do struggle to see the screen, or if there's any audio and it's not coming through correctly, please just let us know. Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Over to you.
Thanks. Most talks of this nature seek to inform you, but I want to do more than that. I want to persuade you. And in a line, what I want to persuade, at least I want you to ask you to consider that if you don't know Python, it's worth spending some time getting up to speed for it. That's a tall order. That is a lot of work. And so I'm going to spend the next 40 minutes kind of trying to justify that statement. And let me just go back one step and say that where I think we're coming from. This is the UK Fabric User Group. But a few months ago, it used to be the UK Power BI User Group. As you know, Fabric was announced in May. It's still very new. And I suspect that most of the people in the audience, or like me, have got a background in Power BI, and they're looking at this new stuff called Fabric, which Power BI seems to be one small corner. And there's two facets to that. On one hand, it's really exciting. There's all this new stuff that we've got to learn: data lakes, SQL, pipelines, ADF, data flows, you name it. But the other aspect is that it's pretty daunting. Power BI is already, it's difficult to learn. We've got to learn Power BI, we've got to learn visualization, we've got to learn data cleaning, Power Query, we've got to learn DAX. It's not easy, it's difficult. And then all of a sudden there's all this stuff. And we can't learn it all. Nobody can learn it all. That way lies madness. So in a sense, we've got to be a bit selective about what we're going to do. So the way that I'm going to explain myself is I'm going to present a case study. It's called the price paid case study. I hope it kind of feels a bit familiar to you. I'll talk about it later on. But I'm going to start off with this Power BI report that you can see here. Very familiar to most of you. And then we'll move from the familiar to the unfamiliar. We'll look at the data behind it, the table behind it. And I've created that table in 3 ways. That's the thing about Fabric. You can do many things many ways. One way is using data flows or Power Query. Another way is using what's called a pipeline or Azure Data Factory, a copy task. And the third way is using a Python notebook. I'm going to show you each of those 3 ways and focus a bit more on the Python notebook because that'll be less familiar. And maybe at the end of that, you'll say, well, there are 3 good ways, but I don't see why I should use Python. But then I'm going to show you a bit more about what Python can do, how it can go from the data engineering task, which we've just done, to bring this data in and to do data analysis, and how the code that I write is simple, straightforward. The problem with Python for many people is that it's code. With Power Query, it's point and click and things like that. But I'm going to talk about how ways we can get over that mental block of seeing an empty screen. One way is using ChatGPT, then there is called Data Wrangler. We'll have a look at those to help us write our Python code, and they do those very well. Finally, I'll talk about how ubiquitous Python is by going off script and just showing you the newly announced Python in Excel. And the Python skills that you learn when you're learning Python in Fabric can also be applied to using Python in Excel. So that's the plan. I hope you like it. I'm going to speak for 40 minutes, as I've said. I'm going to stop then and see if there's any questions. I don't see why I should do all the work. Leon and Pragati are here and they can jump in and answer questions too. And so we'll see how we go. Great. Let me start by introducing you to the case study. And I'm going to start with this rather simple Power BI report here. What we're looking at is and the number of sales, and these are the sales of houses or properties in England and Wales. The data is from the Land Registry, and what we can do, they go back all the way to 1995. And what we can see is the number of houses that were sold each year. Obviously, this is 2023. Let me just do one thing. This is 2023. Obviously, we've only kind of a bit part way through the year. I think this is March data, but we can see basically what happened in the financial crisis. So this is all very familiar to people, and I've made my first mistake, because what I was going to do originally, I was going to start off like this. Notice there's about 1 million rows. There's about 25 years. There's actually about 28 million rows in this data set. And because I'm using a data source from Fabric, what I can do is I can come in here and I can click on my property type code. I'll just stick that on the legend, and things work really quickly. So that's already one benefit of Fabric. If we think about bringing 28 million rows into Power BI Desktop, we'd have to put it into import. It would take some time, but this seems to work really, really well. So that's what I think is very familiar to you. I'll just save that. But the question is, how do we get that data into Fabric in the first place? What's the kind of data engineering task? So before I do that, let me just introduce a bit to the data. This is public data. It comes from the Land Registry. If you want a copy of this data, you can go to the Land Registry here and you can download this file. It's a CSV file, 4 gigabytes, as I've said. What I have done actually is I've downloaded that file and just put it in a place on the web, a public place on the web. Here it is. I'm using something called Azure Storage Explorer, and we're just having a look at where it is. It happens to be, I put somewhere public so that Fabric, being a cloud service, can just grab it. There it is at 4.5 gigabytes, it says there. So what we are going to do is we are going to look at how we might bring that in, as I say, in 3 ways. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my Fabric tab. Now, the one thing I'm going to say is that this is completely live. I have got no slides, I've got no backup, and I am in the hands of the demo gods here. So this is high risk, not for you, high risk for me. You might see me fall flat on my face, but we might come across some problems, but let's see where we get to. Okay, so what I've done is I've created a workspace, and that workspace is called Python in Fabric. It's a Fabric workspace, and in that workspace, what I've created before the talk is a lakehouse. Let's call property. And in that lakehouse, I have a few tables. Let's have a look at these tables, and they're all exactly the same table, nearly. So price paid clean is this 28 million rows, and I'll bring it and have a look at it. This is the one created by Python. And what we've got is one called data flow. It's going to be exactly the same result, exactly the same table that will be created by our data flow, and one called price paid by pipeline that's going to be created by pipeline.
Sorry, Mark.
Let's have a quick
look. Sorry, Mark, to interrupt. Can you just zoom out a little bit? Because I think everyone is not able to see exactly.
Can you see it now? Oh, right. Do you want me to zoom in?
Yes, please,
zoom in. Sorry,
okay,
zoom
zoom in. Let me zoom in. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay. So
yeah, I think it's better. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So what we've got is 28 million rows here. We've got 16 columns. What it is every row represents a sale. The first, let me just do this. The first row is a unique transaction ID. We're going to care about that. The second row is the price. Third row is a date. The fourth row is a postcode. The fifth row is a property type: F for flat, T for terraced, S for semi, D for detached, O for other. There's 5 types. And then some other information which we don't really care about too much. And in fact, what we're going to do after here is going to get rid of those. That's not good data quality. That's geographical information put in by solicitors, and the postcode, looking up that data on the postcode is a lot easier. So what we can see, if I have a look at this first row, is that on the 29th of November, 1996, flat 1 in 10 Church Road, wherever it is, in postcode TN37, was sold for the grand sum of £20,000. If only that were the case now. So, and we've got 28 million rows like that. And what we've done is we brought this in as a free whiz. If I look at data flow, you'll see exactly the same data, exactly the same number of rows, and so on. Lovely. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have a look at the 3 ways of bringing that data in. In fact, there is a 4th way, and a slightly different ballpark. We can actually bring it into SQL, into something called a data warehouse. Maybe I won't do that, but if people are interested in the Q&A, we can talk about that. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my workspace, and we'll look, again, we're going starting off with the familiar. I'll stick. What I'm going to actually do is I'm going to stick in my property lake, and again remind you that what we've got here when it comes up is we've got this. If I bring up, I'll bring the price paid cleanup. That's our Python one. Remind you that a couple of other advantages that we've got is I can come along and click from a lakehouse to a SQL endpoint view. And what's nice about that is once I've brought my data in, it is a file, but I'm able to write some SQL. So another benefit of Fabric when it comes up. And obviously here, let's have a look. Let's have a look at this. Here is the data again, but if I click on this SQL code and come along, give it a second for it to come up, what we've got is a simple SQL statement that basically does a very similar analysis to the Power BI, which is basically looking at the total market value, the total price of all the properties sold in each year, and the total number of sales, which is nice. And of course, what we can do once we've got it in the lakehouse is we can go into model. We've got the Power BI model pane there. One of the interesting things is, great, we can create our measures. Notice one thing though that we can't do is create DAX calculated columns here. So we're going to do that when we, oh my goodness, we've got some lightning going on. There's a bit of a dramatic background. So we're going to do that. Hopefully it won't kind of affect the router. So we're going to do that in a few ways. So let me just go back. That's our model pane. We've talked about our queries, and we can see the data. And just as a reminder as well, if I go back from the SQL endpoint view to the lakehouse view, and it is live and it's taking a bit of time, lakehouse view, we can see, again, of course, we'll see the data, but as well as that, just as a quick reminder, these are files, these are compressed Delta files, so I can come along as well, and I can, as well as seeing the data, I can see the files. So let's start by looking at, when this comes up, I'll continue. Let's start by looking in a minute. There we are. We can see the fact that this is basically a set of compressed files, Parquet files, or data-like files. Good. I'm going to go back into my Python in Fabric, and let's have a look at one of the ways that we can do this. And one of the ways is we can come in and create a data flow. I'll just open that up. And this, I hope, is going to be very familiar to Power BI users because it really is Power Query on the web. And what I've done is a very simple Power Query. It will take a few moments to come up. And when it comes up, you'll see that I basically pointed to that file on the web. If I click on Import a CSV, what we'll be able to see is there's our file. Let me just move that out of the way for the moment. We've got no column headers. The land registry are not that helpful. So what we've got to do, and as I say, we've got 16 columns in there. The last 6 we don't really need. So I'm going to choose the columns. And you know what I'm doing there. I've chosen just the first 10 columns. This column is not a string, it's the price, it's a whole number, a large whole number. And this is not a string, it's a date. So I'm going to change the column types of those two. And then finally, I'm going to rename the columns. So very familiar. And if you have seen this before, it looks like Power Query. The only difference is that this has got a data destination. And if we have a look at that, that is going to push this data into my lakehouse, my property lakehouse, and it's going to be the price paid by data flow. And if I click on publish, which I'm not going to do, and I click on refresh, then 40 minutes later, I will get a table, that price paid by data flow table. So that's familiar. Maybe less familiar, but also a kind of point and click way. Another way that we could do it is this. I'm going to my price paid. This time I'm going to use a pipeline and a copy data task. And again, what I'm doing is I'm just creating a task. This is the old Azure Data Factory. And again, I can choose, again, it's more of a point and click, and I can say, I just fill in the blank. So I'm going to say, I'm going to copy from A to B. What is A? I'm going to test the connection. That is, I pointed to that external file, and I can preview the data in the source so we can see the source. You'll see it's exactly the file that we talked about. I can come along to my destination. Again, this is going to be my price paid via pipeline. And I can just set up a mapping from the column numbers to give column names and remind it that the price is a whole number, the transaction date is a date time, and I can build that. And if I do that, and if I run it, then about 7.5 minutes later, I'm going to get my price paid via pipeline table. So I'll get rid of that. So those are 2 ways to do it, and they're quite good. Let me now concentrate. I'm going to show you a third way. And what I'm going to do is maybe less familiar to people. But what I want to talk about is show, first of all, that if I do the same equivalent things, it's pretty straightforward. Even though you might not have seen much Python before, you'll be able to understand the code. And what I'll also do is I'll just zoom in a bit more so that people can read the code. You don't need to read all of the code. And what I'm going to do, this is a notebook. And in this notebook, what I've got, it combines, I've got my comments rather than putting them in the code. I can put them in nice, structured, formatted text here, which I think is a lot easier. And then in these dark gray cell, I'll run the first one, is a piece of Python code. Now, as it happens, this piece of Python code in this cell is probably the most complicated that you'll see. But all it's doing is doing some kind of building up a string. And that string is basically the link to that external data set. That's all that is doing. So we've got that external data set. So I've just run that. It's just run now, 6:20. I'm 20 minutes into the talk. And what we're going to do is I'm going to come along, first of all, and I should have done something before. I'm going to edit, and I'm going to clear all the outputs from my practice run. So the next thing I'm going to do, and I want to show you how easy it is, I'm going to say, go and read this CSV file. That's the variable that points to the path. We don't have any headers. Fabric gives me this wonderful thing called a Spark Life Pool. Spark is the engine that's going to take this and do the heavy lifting of bringing that data in. So what I'm saying is go and get me that, go to that Spark and read this file. By the way, it's a CSV file and it doesn't have a header. Then I'm just going to say, show me the first 2 records. And what I want you to do is, and I'm just going to zoom out for a moment, just so that you can see the whole records in one file. It just makes it easy. Then I'll zoom back in to show the code. Let me just zoom out. There we go. Nearly. I'll just zoom out one more time because I want to just look at this. And what we've done there is we've got our first 2 pieces of data. So it was as simple as that. That was very easy to get our first couple of data sets in. Now, what we'll do now is we'll come to our next piece of code. I'm just going to count the rows. This is a count function. df is the variable for my Spark Python table in memory, and I'm also going to print the schema. That just gives me a list of columns. So I'm starting to analyze and have a look at my table. And this takes a bit more time. You might be thinking why? Because Spark is very lazy, and when it only had to show 2 rows, it only had to load 2 rows, and now it has to, because it has to count them, it has to load all 28 million rows. So that's why it's taking a few seconds to do that. But once it's done, we've got it in memory. And there we are. We can see that there is 28 million rows, and this, we've got the structure. Everything at the moment is string, and as I say, because there's no column headers, in this case it's underscore, not column 1 to column 16, underscore column 0, C0 to C15. So that's good. We've analyzed it. One boilerplate piece of code which I'm going to gloss over is something that always remains the same. What we're saying here is basically when you create the file, I want you to optimize it so that it's really optimized so that Power BI can really run fast off it. I think Chris Wagner at the last session talked about direct late. And so we'll just run that. It's always the same. It'll take less than a second. But it means that our Power BI will run really quickly. Now, if I had 2 minutes of your time, I would uncomment this code and run it. But really all this code is doing is writing a table. The table name is called price paid. Well, it's price paid original in the thing. It's writing it to our tables folder. And if all we wanted to do was to copy the data from an external source and put it into our data lake, we could run that and then we're done. So I won't run that now. We already have the table price paid original there. It will take a couple of minutes, but that's less than the 7 minutes it took for the pipeline. It's a lot less than the 40 minutes it took for Power Query. So the next thing is we've talked about how we don't want those final 6 columns. So simply what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop those columns, and then I'm just going to again to show the first few rows. Now I can zoom in a bit more because now I don't need to do that. Let me zoom in a bit more before I get told off. And there we are. We can see that we've just got rid of those final 6 columns. As I say, they're not needed because if we know the postcode, we can look up, and with the postcode, look up all the geographical information. The next thing I want to do is obviously is to give those columns proper names. The first column is called transaction ID, second is called price. Though you don't necessarily need to understand exactly what's going on here, you can see that we're using some with column rename method, and we're chaining these. So we're going to rename all these columns. And again, I'm just going to run that, and we're going to see the difference in that we've got, now that we've got that, we have got proper column names. The next thing that, and you can see what I'm doing is exactly equivalent to what I did with the Power Query. In the Power Query, I renamed the columns. This is the exact equivalent. And again, it's just showing that. There are a couple of things I've got to do now. Price and is really a whole number. Transaction date is a string. Because it was a CSV file, it's just brought them in as strings. So again, we can run a tiny bit of Python code. Again, we don't need to understand the details, but the gist is reasonable. We're taking the price column, we're forcing it to be an integer, and we're taking the transaction data column and we're forcing it to be a date. And I'll just do those. And then you can see that we've got the price is a whole number, an integer, the transaction date is a date. That means what we can do now, something that we actually didn't do in the in Power Query, is to create a new column. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come along and say, I'm going to create a new column. It's going to be called transaction year. And the value of transaction year, I'm going to use the year function, very much like the Excel year function. And I'm going to take the year of the transaction date. I'm going to run that. The reason I'm doing that is because, as I mentioned, with a Fabric, you can't write DAX calculated columns. I need a proper column in there because I want to show a chart showing my transaction year by showing my sales by transaction year at the moment. Obviously, if I was doing a proper model, I might have join it with a date table, but here I'm just creating that transaction year. There it is. We can see it in the schema, and I will just zoom out again so I can show you. There it is. Transaction year column. Let me just zoom back again. Once I've done that, there we go, I'll zoom back. Once I've done that, what I could do again, another couple of minutes, I could create my clean table. I won't do that because we'd be just sitting around for 2 minutes. But as I say, 28 million rows in 2 minutes, not too bad. So I'm just going to stop there, take a breather, because what we've done is we've shown the kind of data engineering task. We've got the data in 3 ways. What I hope to have shown is maybe dispelled, hopefully if you feel maybe a little more comfortable with using Python. What I like about Python is that I can read this, I can write comments, I can understand it 6 months later when I come in. To me, it feels the nicest and easiest way of doing that. Good. Okay. So we can take Python and we can go a bit further than that. And what we can do is we can start doing some of our analysis in Python. And what I'm going to do, first of all, is I'm going to come along and do something slightly technical. We've got here what's called a Spark dataset. Spark is the engine for the heavy lifting, shaping, cleaning, moving millions or more rows. There's a data library in Python called Pandas, and Pandas is the really good one for doing data analysis. Pandas doesn't scale up to millions of rows very well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to sample my data and just bring back randomly every row in 1,000. And I'm going to create a new data frame called df sample. So I'm just going to run that one. And you can see what it's doing. It's basically going to give me and I'm going to show the first 2 rows. It's going to give me a data set with 28,000 rows rather than 28 million, 1 in 1,000. And then I'm hoping that that's going to be representative. I can show that, I can use that to do some plotting, which is Pandas is really good about. There we go. We can see that we've got 28,000 rows rather than 28 million, and it's just the same. The next thing I want to do as well is I want to change it from a Spark data frame to a Pandas data frame, and I can use just this method. Once we've done those slightly mechanical bits, we can start analyzing our data. Now, the question comes then is how do we do it? And sometimes when it's really hard to write that first Python code. So I'm going to suggest 2 ways that it can help. Firstly, there's something called Data Wrangler. Data Wrangler is a kind of add-in to this notebook that's a bit like Power Query. What we can do is we can open up a data set, have a view of it, click and point on some operations, and it will write the code for us. Good. Okay. So what I've done is I've got my pandas data frame here, and what it's doing, pandas is showing me the first 5 and the last 5 rows of that. That looks good to me. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run this. I'm just creating a copy of that table in memory, because I'm going to call it DF Wrangler, because I'm going to later on, I'm going to wrangle that and change it. But later on, I'm going to come back to that and use ChatGPT to build some visualizations. So I just wanted to kind of separate things out and create a copy. So far so good. I've got a copy called DF Wrangler. Let's go to data and let's launch Data Wrangler. And then I'm going to say, it looks and says, what pandas data frames do you want? I'm going to choose my Wrangler data frame. I think Microsoft have announced that they're actually going to use Spark data. They'll make it available for Spark data frames in a while as well. What I'm going to do for the moment is while we've got this, I'm going to go and zoom down a bit because we're not looking so much at code now. But let's say what I want to do is this. I want to do a kind of typical operation. I've got my property type code. We've got 5 different types, T for terrace, S for semi, and I don't want to use the word. I want to use the full name in my legend, standard thing. What I'm going to do is this. I'm going to keep that. I'm going to come along and do things which will be very familiar to Power Query people. I'm going to come into I think it's my schema, and I'm going to say, I'm clicked on my property type. First of all, I'll just clone the column, and I'm going to call it property type name. I'll put it in there. There we go. And as it says, it shows you what happens. It shows you the code that it's creating, shows you the new column it's going to be doing. I'll just apply that step. Underneath, we can see the code that would be writing for us. So I've got that operation. And so now what I'm going to do with this new column, I'll come along, click on this column, and I'm going to come along and say replace values. Again, there's a sort and filter. Where is it? It's probably replace values. Where's my replace values? It's always, you can never see it where you want it. New column by example, drop columns, formulas, find and replace. That's probably it. So I'm going to say my old value, and for example, I'm going to say T for terrace. I want to match the whole string, and my new value is going to be terrace. I'll apply that step, and then that's fine. I'll add a new step, and I'll come along, and if you've ever done find and replace in Query Editor, you know that's fine. Again, I'm going to do find and replace. The old value, this is S. I want the whole string, and I'm going to say the new value is semi for semi-detached. I'm going to apply that. And it should preview, and then we can see it. So very similar to Power Query, we see what's happening there. Once I'm good with that, I'm going to preview code for all steps. That's the code I didn't have to write. I'm going to add that code to the notebook. And what it's done, and now I can zoom in. Let's just zoom in a bit. Hopefully it's written this code for us. I can zoom in. Control plus. Right, hopefully that's big enough. So, oops, well, maybe too big. Let's just come along. And so what Data Wrangler has done has written this code for us. So it's a way for me to learn the code. I can say, okay, what it's done, let's just run that code. It's creating a function called clean data, and then it's using that function, taking a copy of the Wrangler and creating a new data frame, and then showing me the first 5 rows. So let's just run that. So I can run it, and once I've run it, I can think, oh, okay, I don't need to use Data Wrangler. I can understand what it's doing now. That's written me the first step of code. I can go along and I can start. That's given me the start that I needed to be able to write a bit more good Pandas Python data code. Good. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is say that I just want to visualize the data. Now, I don't know where to start with this. I want to visualize the data. So what I've done is I've come to ChatGPT, And I've asked ChatGPT, even the ChatGPT you probably know has a brand new version, much better, called ChatGPT version 4. But I'm using version 3.5. But even version 3.5, I'm giving it prompts like this. Write a Python script to plot a chart in Seaborn of the number of transactions by transaction year. And what it did is gave me this script. And what I've done, if I come back over here, is I've just taken that script and copied pretty much verbatim into a code cell. All I've done is change the name, because I was silly enough not to say given a data frame called df_pd_sample, and then it would have done that for me. But I've just changed that name. That I haven't written, and I'm just going to run that code. And what I get out of that is I get my visualization. Now it's a wonderful visualization on all these beautiful color palette. Is maybe what I don't need, but what I've got now, I've got the code and I can tweak it, I can play with it, I can understand it, and that's got me started in my Python learning. So two ways, ChatGPT as well, and we can take ChatGPT and go further. So I've given ChatGPT another thing, saying again, I've asked it to, I've said ChatGPT, I have a pandas data frame, blah, blah, blah. It has a categorical column property type code, count the number of rows, and it wrote that for me. And so I'm going to come along, I'm going to run that code. And again, it tells me, it gives me the breakdown. There were 6,456 detached houses in my property type code, and so on. And then again, I can, if I ignore that, again, it gives me really good code. And here I'm starting to learn about Python dictionaries as well. If I want, what I'm doing here is using Python to do what we did with Data Wrangler to map a new column where O is mapped to other, D is mapped to detached, and so on. And you can see if I go down, and I'll just control minus a bit, probably too far. Let's have a quick look. Yes, we've got that new property type name there. So two ways, ChatGPT and Data Wrangler are your friends when it comes to learning Python. We can even ask Python a ridiculously difficult one. And here I will zoom in. It's, okay. Sorry about that. Let me zoom in this way. And here I said, write a Python script to train and test and build a regression model. Go ahead. And the dependent label is a price column. Use these. Okay. So what I'm trying to do is something a bit ridiculous. I'm trying to estimate the price of the property based on whether the property type and the year. Of course, let me just do Control Not so I can come back and run that. It gives me some code that works. It's a terrible model because it's not commonsensical. I'm comparing flats in Chelsea and flats in Middlesbrough, which won't do. Obviously, there's a geographical element, but still, it's code for me. I can take this code apart line by line. I can look at it. I can run it. I can really understand, oh, what does this do? And so on. So that's a way of learning as well. And obviously, an absolutely terrible model, but that's not the point. I'm going to finish in a couple of seconds, but I want to point out my killer argument for using Python, and that's Python is ubiquitous. And to prove the point, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to go off script and nothing in Microsoft Fabric, but I've come into Excel. And you might have noticed or seen the announcement that Python will be available in Excel. And it was just a few weeks ago. It's available to those of people who are on what's called the beta channel. And so here I am. I've got, this is an Excel lesson that I use, and we do some hard things in Excel. So with my students, we're coming on, we've got a data set. We've got a data set. Where's my data set? There, sample data set. And what we're doing, we're doing things, we're doing the countis function. So we're doing hard things. And what I'm doing here, just to put Python in Excel for its paces, is that if I come over here, well, let's just come over. Yeah, what I'm doing is I'm writing. So let me just zoom in there. I can't really zoom in. Let me just do this. Control one. I'm writing a bit of Python code in Excel to take that data set, group it by the country, and give me the sales. Or even more, let me go another Python piece of code to do the equivalent of this, show me the number of sales and the count of quantity. So Python's available in Fabric, and if you learn that, if you need it to use it in Fabric, in Excel, you've already learned it. And of course, Python is the most popular data language there is by far, and an open source language. So I hope that those have given you some motivation to learn it. I'll be interested. I'm going to shut up in a minute, and I'll be interested if what people have to say about that. So thank you, Pragati. Thank you, Leon. I'll open it for Q&A and discussion.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mark. Brilliant session there, touching on all areas of Python in Fabric and also in Excel as well. So very, very informative. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, and I think I loved seeing Data Wrangler. I heard about Data Wrangler a lot. Many people tweeted about it, how good it is. And it was good to see how it can be used within Fabric. So, and yeah, thanks for highlighting that Python is going to come to Excel soon. So yeah, Excel users can start using that as well. So that was a great demo, Mark. Thank you so much.
So have I persuaded anybody in the audience to spend a bit of time and learning Python? Does anybody want to tell me yes or no?
I learned Python.
There you go. Challenge accepted.
Pragati, but
we do have some questions coming in as well.
Let's hear the questions now. And one of us will try and answer them.
Definitely. So the first one is coming in from Jude's Ice Cream, and they ask, are Fabric workspaces just like Power BI ones? Are they in fact interchangeable?
As far as I understand, Jude, that's the case. Obviously, a Fabric workspace can have different sorts of objects. A Power BI workspace can have reports and data sets, data marts. Fabric workspace can have lake houses. It can have SQL data warehouses. So it can have more of the Fabric objects that you don't get with Power BI. But the same thing, it's a place for a team to work in. If you're a member of the workspace, you can see it. It's got the same roles. So correct me if I'm wrong, but to me, it is the same. I'm looking at Pragati and Leon, and they're smiling.
You are right. It's a really good overview. So in theory, the workspaces work exactly the same as they do in Power BI. It's just the other artifacts or objects, whatever you want to refer to them. So, for example, the notebooks, they would just exist within the new workspace environment where they wouldn't in a traditional Power BI workspace as well. So yeah, totally agree. And Mark, it's worthwhile noting that you have had a lot of yeses coming in.
Oh, that's good.
So I'll just show some of those on the screen.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Rishi. Oh my goodness. Thank you, LinkedIn user.
And then I'll just pass over to Pragati for our next question.
Go ahead, Pragati.
Yeah, so the next question is again from Juice Ice Cream. I really like that name. It has got ice cream in it. So he's asking, like in the data flows editor, the Power Query screen, where the column names not included in the source.
Right, and that is because they're not in the data. The land registry produce a file without column headers. Odd that they do that, but that's exactly what it had to do. It's just specific to that file. That's why we had to do all that renaming. That file comes without column headers, so we have to actually add them. It's just specific to that file, Jude.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I can, if necessary, I can go and show that. Let me just go back. I'm still showing my screen.
Yeah, let me just bring that back up for you.
Okay, lovely. If I come along, so if all we've done here is we've read the code. But what I've had to say is read the option. There is no header. That's what I'm saying. And there is no header in this data. Otherwise, the first row, that row would be transaction ID, price, and it's not. So there you go.
Thanks,
Perfect.
Mark.
Thank you very much, Mark. Okay, let's move on to our next question. We have another question from Jude's Ice Cream, but I'm sorry, Jude, I'm going to make you wait a little bit so we can get to a couple of others if that's okay. So this one coming in from Richard Landy, and the question is Fabric integrated with Azure DevOps? Can you commit your notebook to a Git repo? I will caveat this, Mark, that Rishi has answered this in the comments.
Well, Rishi knows more than me. I think that it is integrated with the Azure DevOps Git, and you can integrate it with a Azure DevOps repo, but not yet a Git repo. But that is coming. But Rishi, tell me, am I right or am I wrong?
That's pretty much exactly the same answer that Rishi gave.
That's what he
Okay,
said. Yeah, that's what he said. Yeah.
Good.
That's absolutely fine. And Rishi, good to see you. I hope you enjoyed Big Data London today, if you indeed attended. Pragati, I'll hand over to you to the next question, please.
Yeah. So the next question I'll take up from Rishi now. So he's asking, do you have the notebook or data wrangler steps somewhere available to share?
Yeah, I will share it. I haven't got it yet, but yes, I will put it on my Git repo, and I will email to you so you can email out. It's just I've been building it last minute today.
Yeah.
So
No worries.
yes, but absolutely, I'll provide the notebook, and I'll also provide a link to that file, which is a public file. So you should be able to take the notebook, and you should be able to run it exactly as I have. I always like to do that. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question. We will get to Jude's Ice Cream's question now. Regarding the Spark method, they noticed a handy feature allowing you to right-click the source file and open in Notebook.
Yes, absolutely.
Will that not write the code for you in the Notebook?
Well, let's have a look there, Jude. Am I still? If I'll share my screen again.
Absolutely. No, it's fine. We can see.
Lovely. That's great. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go into the property Lakehouse. And I think what Jude was saying when this comes up is I can click on a file and say open in Notebook. And let's just do that and see the code that he writes. So I'm going to come to my price paid clean and give it a second. I'm going to click on this. And was it right? So it wasn't there. It was in that's a SQL endpoint. So maybe it's in the Lakehouse. Let me just go and switch over to the Lakehouse. And of course, this is where the demo gods hit me. There we go, Lakehouse. And we're just seeing here. And if I come back when it shows it, click on price paid clean, click on the three dots, open in Notebook, I'll say in a new notebook. And as soon as it comes up, I'll zoom in. And we should see, basically, I think it's going to just create a Spark data frame. So it's creating a new notebook for me. And give it a second, drum roll. And I think we'll just get a few lines of code in there in a minute, Jude. It always takes longer than when you're in a presentation. It always takes a lot longer. I'm quite surprised that nothing has crashed so far. But let's hope it's worth it. Welcome to your new notebook. Type here in the cell editor. I hope he's going to type something for me. Loading Lakehouse. So it's opened a new notebook in that Lakehouse, and it should write me a code cell which just loads it into a data frame. So, but that just gets you started.
It does.
So while we're waiting for that, is there another question that I can be queuing up?
Absolutely, Mark. And what I was just going to say, it's probably worthwhile noting that the reason for the extra time taken here is because it will be starting a Spark session in the background as well. So initially that takes some time in the first time round. In terms of the next question, while we wait, so again, Juice Ice Cream is, will Excel already have a Python environment built in, and are the libraries flexible? And the same question is for Fabric too.
So yes, so let's start with Excel since you mentioned it. Excel is very new, but the integration is really, really nice. We can create these cells here, and we can write Python code, switch to a Python cell, and we can create Python code. Let me just show you an example here. So for example, what we've got here, something that was difficult in Excel to do, we've got this data, various categories, maybe costs in January, February, and typically what we want to do is we want to make it, this is an untidy data frame, we want to make it into this long format here, a column for category, column for variable. So what we can do is we can just bring the data in. You can see this Excel function is basically takes that the table called monthly costs, that's the table above, and it's got headers, and it will change it into a data frame. We can look at it as a data frame in Excel, but then we can write some code here, and again, let me just control 1, and we can very simply do what we couldn't do in Excel quite, to pivot the data. Now, it's already very good. It's nice. They are but it's still not a full development editor. There's not too much IntelliSense and things like that. It works quite well. I'm sure later on they will make it a better one. This is the earliest of previews, but there are already add-ins. If you want to go to add-ins, and there is an add-in somewhere that gives you a better Python editor than just the formula bar.
Excellent.
So, and what I can't quite remember, but if I go into the second part of your question was, if I go into my formulas, excuse me, coming back into my Python, what it's got some libraries already initialized. It runs Python in the cloud, and again, control 1. These are the libraries got initialized. There is a way, and they're most of the standard libraries that you want. If you know Python, you'll recognize those as the key libraries, including pandas, which I've talked about, and Seaborn, which I did for the visualizations. If you want to add other libraries, you can do that. There is a way of doing that and adding them in.
Excellent, thank you. And then we have a question coming in from Tiani Ding, if hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yeah.
Hi, Mark. Do I always need to use PySpark data frame to load data from the Lakehouse? If my data is small, can I just load it to Pandas data frame from the start?
That's a good question. That is a good question. If you've got a small file there, can you use Pandas? And the answer is, I don't know. I'm just thinking about it.
So you can.
So you can. Good.
Yeah. So
good.
the way to do this would be in your in a new notebook. You head over to your Lakehouse to your files, and you right click your file option. I presume this would be the same for tables as well, but happy to try a walkthrough here.
No, absolutely.
If you right click on one of your tables there for us, Mark.
If I right click.
Yeah. Load data. Okay, so interestingly,
Pandas often,
interestingly, with a table, you only have the Spark option here.
Yeah.
Now, with a file, you have the option to choose between Spark and Pandas. With a file-based offering. So interesting. I wasn't aware that for table you only had the Spark offering, but definitely when using files for CSVs, etc., you're able to use right-click and select either Pandas or Spark.
Unfortunately, I haven't got any files in there to show you, but I'm sure. Yes, remember seeing that. Thank you, Leon.
No problem at all. And just in terms of, just to circle back round to Jude's ice creams question as well. So what you want to do to be able to use the right click functionality for opening or loading data in your notebook is actually create a new notebook first, and then again using the same method we've just used, right click, load data, and then select new notebook, and that will create your import and your initial data frame from that perspective. Okay. I believe we don't have any more questions that I'm aware of currently, unless I'm missing some, Pragati. Sorry, I was off fabricing in the background.
No, I think we don't have any more questions. Yeah.
Excellent. Fantastic. And Mark, like I say, absolutely amazing session. So good to see Python being used both in Fabric and from an Excel perspective. I did have a devil's advocate question, if I may. It's one from me. Why would we use this method in either a notebook or in Excel over using Python in Power Query, for example, or Python script in Power Query?
Okay. If we were to go into Power Query and Python script, this is the most direct method. First of all, Python in Power Query, we'd have to start up the Power Query engine, wouldn't we? Actually, so what you're saying is this. Let me, if I can share, well, I won't share my screen, but we created a data flow. That's Power Query. Within that Power Query, it is possible in Power Query on the desktop to have a Python step, of course. And when we create that Python step in Power Query, first of all, I suppose it has to go through quite a lot. It has to kind of marshal the data, first of all, and put it into kind of a Power Query, and then change it into some sort of Python pandas data frame and back. So I suspect A, it would be inefficient, and B, also when we're writing, when we wrote those steps, Python steps in Power Query and Power BI desktop, we didn't get much of a good IDE. We were able to kind of click on it, and so it's much better to use the environment here where we've got all our IntelliSense, we've got and things like that. So it's better, and especially coming. I haven't really looked at it, but sooner or later, if anybody's used VS Code, it's a really good editor, and sooner or later we're going to be. I've used it in the browser, but sooner or later we're going to be able to open it up and develop our Python in VS Code, which is the perfect place, the best place to develop Python. Makes it so much easier.
Thanks, Mark. I absolutely agree. Just wanted to touch on that for users that are trying to use Python within Power Query using the Python scripts, and as you mentioned, it's just much more efficient to do it in Fabric and potentially in Excel now as well. So thank you very much. And Rishi, I will bring this on screen just because it's going to be the last comment we're going to show. So thanks, Rishi. Python in Power Query is so 2022. I think you need a personal gateway to refresh. Is quite clunky. Yeah. So yeah, just to pad that out a little bit more. Generally, using Python in Power Query locally is absolutely fine to a certain extent. As soon as you get into the service, it's a world of horror. Plus, doesn't have many libraries that are supported. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, like I say, thank you very much, Mark. Absolutely insightful session, and we'd love to have you back with us again in the future.
I look forward to it.
Perfect.
Thank you so much,
Pragati,
Mark. That was great.
Let's just go ahead and close out today, and thank everybody very much for joining us. Like we always say, you could have been anywhere in the world, but you've been here with us at the Microsoft Fabric UK user group.
And just a last announcement for me, because I know I'll forget it. So guys, Data Weekender is returning back on 4th November 2023. And the CFS for the speakers is still open, and it will close by the end of this month. So whether you're a new speaker, experienced speaker, please go and submit your sessions. And it's a completely virtual, free data platform conference, so you can just register it for free. So I'll be just putting the link to CFS in the comment section. So if you guys are interested in doing some submissions, then this is the time you need to submit, because our CFS is going to close soon. So it's just open till the end of this month. So Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah.
And for those of you that are new speakers that are looking to speak for the first time, CFS is an acronym for Call for Speakers. So this is for you to go and click the link and submit your session for an opportunity to speak at a fantastic event, which is Data Weekender.
Exactly. Thanks. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.